how good are Federal Shorty rifled slugs? We begin today's video with a breakdown of the ammo that we're shooting. We will be shooting a Gila 1 3/4 inch 7/8 ounce mini slugs, Federal Shorty shot shell 1 ounce rifled slugs, and Winchester Super X 2 3/4 inch shells that also have a 1 ounce rifled slug. Both the Winchester Super X and the Federal Shorty slugs are 1 ounce rifled slugs, while the Aguila mini shell is not a rifled slug. You may notice right off the bat that all three of these slugs have a hollow base, and the majority of their mass is centered towards the face of the projectile. Rifled slugs are meant to be shot out of a smooth bore shotgun, with the flutes on the side channeling air to impart spin on the projectile once it leaves the barrel, though with the bulk of the mass at the face of the projectile, that in and of itself lends stability to a rifled slug. Comparing that against a traditional rifle bullet, where the mass is more spread out across the length of the projectile, the spin is much more important for a rifled bullet to keep it from tumbling, compared to a rifled slug with the hollow base, where the bulk of the mass again is at the face of the projectile, which helps keep it from tumbling and lends more accuracy to the projectile. Looking under the hood of the Federal Shorty shell, we can see that it contains the 1 ounce rifled slug. Federal includes about a pea-sized polymer sphere inside that cavity, along with a polymer spacer that separates the projectile from the disc powder. The Aguila mini slugs that we're shooting today have a 7/8 ounce slug that is not rifled, along with a spacer that separates that projectile from the finer grain, what appears to be disc powder. And finally, our Winchester Super X also has a 1 ounce rifled slug, along with a spacer and a cardboard disc separating the powder charge from the projectile. Before we see the damage these slugs can do from our Maverick 88 security shotgun, let's first do a quick chronograph test and see the numbers we achieve. Okay, 1,041. And that actually, you might see on target cam, that probably landed a good 15 feet or more short of the gong I was aiming at. I'm gonna aim up a little bit. 971. Okay, here we go. $942. Okay. Let's start a new shot sample. I have one of these full-size slugs left. Let's try that. We'll cross your fingers. Hopefully we can get a measurement off this one shell. $1,531. Okay, so the first three shots, I probably just had the Doppler scanning for too fast of a projectile. 1,051 is pretty close to the advertised velocity on the box. We'll just hope the other three would have chronographed that way as well. Let's try these rifled mini slugs now. You can probably tell based on how I'm getting knocked back that the 2 3/4 inch 1 ounce slug, quite a bit more recoil or kick than the mini slugs from the Aguila. Now let's do the Federal 1-ounce rifled mini slug and see how it does. Here we go. Okay, unable to track that projectile. Here we go. $1,227. $1,224. $1,152. $1,220. Quite a very noticeable and what I would call significant velocity increase compared to our Aguila mini shells. Before we crunch the numbers, let's first marvel at some images that the thermal camera captured. Here you can clearly see the difference in energy between the Aguila mini slugs, the Federal Shorty rifled slugs, and the Winchester Super X slugs. Starting with our Aguila mini shell slugs, the advertised velocity on the box, depending on the box you find, is anywhere between 1,250 and 1,300 feet per second. The projectile weight off our scale comes in at approximately 0.8 of an ounce. The energy using the advertised velocity is anywhere between 1,332 and 1,441 foot-pounds of energy. Our average achieved velocity today came out at 985 feet per second, which is well below the numbers printed on the box, and quite a few of the results you'll find doing a Google search on this ammunition. Our energy with our average achieved velocity comes out to 827 foot-pounds of energy. And note here, we did chronograph another set of rounds of this ammunition off camera, and the velocity we achieved then was consistent with the results shown on video today. For our Federal Shorty shot shell rifled slugs, the advertised velocity on the box is 1,200 feet per second. The projectile weight off my scale came in at exactly 1 ounce. The energy using the advertised velocity is 1,399 foot-pounds of energy. Our average achieved velocity today came out at 1,206 feet per second, which is almost identical to what is printed on the box, and the energy of that average achieved velocity comes out to 1,413 feet per second. That's quite a bit more both velocity and energy compared to our Aguila mini shells. What about the Winchester Super X? For the Winchester Super X 2 3/4 inch 1 ounce rifled slug, advertised velocity on the box is 1,600 feet per second. Off my scale, that projectile also weighed in at exactly 1 ounce. The energy using the advertised velocity comes out to 2,486 foot-pounds of energy. Our average achieved velocity, which is really just one projectile that we were able to measure, came out at 1,531 feet per second for 2,277 foot-pounds of energy. Putting these numbers all up at one time, we can see that our Aguila mini shell has the lightest projectile, the lowest velocity, and the lowest energy foot-pounds as a result, with the Federal Shorty sandwiched in between and the Winchester Super X being the top player in today's game. Now let's see how the Federal Shorty shot shell and the Aguila mini slugs do against something that's not just a numbers on a page or a paper target. How about some gourds and water jugs?
We are out here today in our third video on the Federal Mini Shells Versus. In today's video, we are going to be shooting some Federal Mini Shells against Aguila Mini Slugs. Here I have a Aguila Mini Slug. I will do one shot with our Mini Slug against our left hand spaghetti squash. I will then reload with a Federal Mini Slug and we'll shoot our right hand spaghetti squash. Here we go. I would say that spaghetti squash was annihilated. Let's see if our Federal Mini Slug does as much damage. Okay, let's do a second shot. We are going to engage a couple water jugs, and for an added bonus, the middle water jug, that's a gallon water jug, is frozen solid. Let's see how these mini shells do at these targets. Again, with the Federal, starting with the Aguila Mini Shell and our left-hand water jug. And now we are going to do the Federal Rifled Mini Slug at our right-hand water jug. Let's go ahead and do a rifled slug at our frozen jug now. And then I'll run down and pick up the busted jugs. Here we go. Do you think it explodes or just breaks a piece off?
I'd say explode.
All right, here we go. We got ice cubes. Let me go clean those up.
Let's get into the conclusion and talk about some final thoughts now. So far, the numbers we've looked at have been muzzle velocity and energy. Now let's look at how that energy and velocity is maintained over distance. For our Aguila Mini Shell at muzzle, for this one shot, we had 1,000 feet per second. At 50 feet, that projectile speed decreased to 926 feet per second. And at 100 feet, that was 849 feet per second. For our Federal Shorty Mini Shell, our muzzle velocity for this shot was 1,227 feet per second. At 50 feet, that dropped to 1,117 feet per second. And at 100 feet, 1,014 feet per second. And for our Winchester Super X, for this shot, our muzzle velocity was 1,531 feet per second. At 50 feet, it drops to 1,372 feet per second. And at 100 feet, 1,240 feet per second. You might be wondering, why do we see a greater decrease in velocity with the Winchester Super X compared to our other ammos? Drag is affected by velocity. So the higher velocity projectile is going to have more drag on it compared to the slower projectile. Here's an interesting graphic. If you look at the muzzle velocity and energy for the Aguila mini shell, our Federal Shorty shell at 100 feet has higher feet per second and more energy, and our Winchester Super X at 100 feet has higher energy and velocity compared to our Federal Shorty shell. As expected, we saw the highest velocity and energy from our Winchester Super X, the 2 3/4 inch shell, compared to both our rifled mini slug of the Federal Shorty shot shell and the mini slug of our Aguila mini shell. Though I would say both the Aguila mini shell and the Federal Shorty actually showed up pretty well today, with the Federal Shorty, in my opinion, being a little more consistent and the numbers on the box being a little more accurate, at least out of my smoothbore shotgun Maverick 88 security here today. Certainly both the Aguila mini slugs and the Federal mini slugs were up to the task of annihilating the gourds and water jugs they were tasked with engaging. In terms of hunting ammunition, I do think the mini shells will be up to the task, though your accuracy, of course, is going to greatly factor into your success, and you might want to take those shots a little closer in than you might with the 2 3/4 inch slug. Well, anyway, that seems like the perfect spot to end today's video. Let us know in the comments what you think of the mini shells versus the full-size slugs. Fred and I really appreciate you getting this far. Thanks for watching, and as always, have a good day. Good, okay. All right. Hopefully you can hear me. We are going to get some velocity numbers off the Federal rifled mini slugs, the Aguila mini slugs, and as a baseline, we are going to do first Winchester rifled 1 ounce rifled slug. The advertised velocity on the box is 1,600 feet per second. We're starting with this Winchester rifled slug. We'll probably just try to do 3 rounds of each, because compared to the mini shells that we're shooting today, the regular 2 3/4 inch slugged shells going to be a little more punishing comparatively. So to help with what I call recoilization, we're going to start with the rifled slug. Let me start our Doppler here. Okay, here we go. Let's load in a few shells. Now it's about 12, 14 degrees, something like that outside. Luckily, we don't have any wind to contend with yet. Now, I don't have a target set up out there, so we are going to just shoot at one of the gongs, the white gong that hopefully you can see on target cam. It's out at 100 yards. I don't know if we're going to hit it today. The important thing we're looking at is mostly the velocity numbers. Here we go. Okay, could not track projectile. Let's try that again. It's not good. I'm hoping that the wad, or I think it's just like a cardboard backer type thing. I'm hoping it doesn't throw off the Doppler, but we're gonna find out today. Here we go. Okay, it doesn't look like we're getting measurements. All right, there we go. Let's see if the 3rd time is the charm. Okay, well, we couldn't track any of those.